So, I can imagine that most of you watching can agree that My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic is quite the iconic show for many good reasons. From the dozens of memorable episodes, to the even more unforgettable cast of characters, the show has definitely earned its status as among the best cartoons to come out of the 2010s. However, if you have spent any good amount of time reading or looking into MLP FIM's past, there's a good chance you've come across a few early pieces of concept art or sketches which seem a bit different from what we actually ended up getting. As it turns out, from about 2008 to 2010, a lot of brainstorming and refining ideas took place during the show's very early days of development, causing a good number of concepts or designs to either be drastically changed before the show premiered in October of 2010, or alternatively, be completely left on the cutting room floor forever. Despite the show's massive popularity and once massive online fandom, it seems like most MLP fans don't really know the full extent of just how differently things could have turned out. So today, I'm going to dig further into a bunch of old concepts or ideas from what I like to call the pre-Season 1 era of MLP Friendship is Magic's production, and properly show you all the My Little Pony we never got. So, I think we should start at the very beginning, to give some extra context as to how MLP FIM even ended up happening in the first place. Back in 2004, Lowen Faust, an animator and writer who is most well known for working on Cartoon Network shows like The Powerpuff Girls and Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, began to promote online an original property she made called Milky Way and the Galaxy Girls. This was pretty much a planned toy line of dolls, which Lowen Faust herself handcrafted dozens of prototypes for, that she hoped could also eventually be turned into some type of animated show. For the next several years, she would occasionally spend time further developing the concept of the Milky Way and the Galaxy Girls toy brand, and also pitching ideas for a show about it to a few animation studios, like Cartoon Network and even Disney. All these pitches, however, would ultimately be unsuccessful. Flash forward to sometime around early 2008, Lowen once again decided to pitch Milky Way and the Galaxy Girls to another company, this time Hasbro, and they rejected it too. They weren't really interested in it at all. However, they were actually interested in having Lowen Faust make something else for them. Hasbro was planning to launch a cable television network called The Hub in a few years, and the quite successful third generation of their My Little Pony property was also beginning to kinda wind down and come to a close during this time as well. So, after rejecting her Milky Way and the Galaxy Girls pitch, they almost immediately then asked if she would be interested in attempting to make a reboot cartoon of My Little Pony for its upcoming 4th generation instead. Lowen Faust, having had a strong personal connection to the brand ever since she was a kid playing with and collecting MLP toys in the 1980s, chose to accept their offer, and soon thereafter began working on developing ideas for what would eventually become My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic. With that said, sometime slightly earlier in 2008, before Hasbro had actually asked Lowen Faust to develop the show, she uploaded these images to her DeviantArt account of MLP designs she made based off her childhood G1 pony toys in a modernized vector art style. These images are especially notable because I believe it's safe to say that this right here was the first ever incarnation of the main 6 ponies from G4. After Lauren Faust started working on MLP for real though, she subsequently deleted these off her account, and basically used them as a starting off point to begin shaping them into what we now know today. So, let's go through all the big changes having to do with the evolution of these prototype versions of the main six, starting with Twilight Sparkle. This first, quite different looking design was originally based on the G1 pony simply named Twilight, with a very similar color scheme and cutie mark. Sometime later though, Twilight's design and name was then changed to be more similar in appearance to that of the Earth pony from Generation 3, Twilight Twinkle, with only her hair and now moon-themed cutie mark being the main distinctions. This newer iteration of Twilight seemingly stuck around for much longer during the show's early stages, until at least the start of 2009, when her color scheme and cutie mark were then changed into what it is today. The Twilight Twinkle design was also notably featured on full display within the official MLP show Bible, which, don't worry, I will talk more about later. Next up, Pinkie Pie, or actually, as seen in this image, the G1 Pegasus pony named Surprise. Apparently, Lauren Faust had initially wanted Surprise in G4 to be pretty much identical to her Generation 1 counterpart. However, Hasbro shortly afterwards told her that they had somehow lost the trademarks of pretty much every pony from the original 1980s toy lines and cartoons, including Surprise. So, Lauren reworked her into Pinkie Pie, whose design was heavily inspired from the Generation 3 pony of the same name. Although the main big difference being that Pinkie Pie remained a Pegasus for a while even after the redesign. There are several old and pretty fascinating to look back on sketches drawn by Lauren Faust of Pegasus Pinkie out there, including this funny one which she said the context for was, quote, "With Pinkie working at the sugar cube corner, I imagined she had way too much access to sweets, which would then send her wings into hummingbird mode." Despite as fun or even more chaotic as this concept could have been though, Pinkie Pie ultimately ended up losing her wings, so Fluttershy could become a Pegasus instead. And on that note, during the early conceptualization stages of the show, Lauren Faust had indeed originally envisioned Fluttershy as an Earth pony. This was mostly because her design was based on the Earth ponies, Posy and Sky Skimmer, from Generations 1 and 2 of MLP respectively, and also that she thought it simply just matched her shy personality. Additionally, according to a few sketches, Lauren had also thought of a few other names to give her before settling on Fluttershy, such as Summer Azure or Summer for short, Spring Blossoms, Petalwing, and also Meadowbrook. Funnily enough, on this same set of sketches, you can see that she wrote down a note asking all the wings wasted on her. This echoes the fact that she really wanted to keep Pinkie Pie a Pegasus and Fluttershy an Earth pony, because she thought it would have suited them better, which I gotta say I can definitely see where she's coming from. As she said in a recent tweet from 2023 reminiscing about these old sketches, to a certain extent, Fluttershy is an Earth pony at heart. As for the other Pegasus of the main six, Rainbow Dash, she was originally going to be heavily based off the G1 pony Firefly, who has the same type of athletic and competitive personality. Despite this though, Lauren Faust found out that Firefly was among the names which Hasbro lost the trademarks to. So she also redesigned her to instead be based on the G3 fashionista pony Rainbow Dash, while keeping Firefly's more tomboyish personality. However, it's also worth noting that according to the file names of a few leaked Adobe Flash assets from the show, it seems like that her name was initially Rainbow Cyclone for a while, before eventually getting reverted back to Rainbow Dash. A few other smaller details which were later changed include her eyes being colored a bright blue instead of magenta, and her cutie mark being a lone rainbow-colored lightning bolt without a cloud. As for Rarity, she was specifically based on the G1 ponies named Glory and Sparkler, with elements of both their designs sort of being mixed and matched into an early version of Rarity. She had a darker colored coat, magenta strikes through her hair, and a different eye color as well. Although it seems like these details were all relatively quickly changed to the Rarity design we're familiar with. And lastly, as for Applejack, there is funnily enough almost nothing to say about her, because minus her missing hat and slightly bigger cutie mark, this first 2008 design of her is effectively identical to what she looks like in the show. Applejack was actually one of the few old G1 pony name trademarks, which Hasbro hadn't lost. So I imagine Lauren Faust simply didn't feel the need to change much about her design. These old prototype versions of the main six put aside though, I also want to quickly mention a few pieces of equally old and interesting concept art which were drawn by an artist called Nicole Goss. The context behind these is that apparently Hasbro told several artists working at DHX Media to create their own original ideas and designs for G4, which is why the stuff you're seeing now looks pretty different from anything in the show. The reason Hasbro did this was so they could effectively have a plan B, just in case they didn't like the material which Lauren Faust would give them. They of course did ultimately end up settling on her designs, but it's still very interesting to see these other drawings, because MLP FIM would have been a vastly different show in nearly every single aspect if Hasbro chose to go with this style instead. According to Nicole Goss in a few DeviantArt comments, it seemingly would have visually been a mix between G1 and G3 of My Little Pony, while also having a more bouncy or fully feeling style of traditional animation. The characters drawn here were also mostly from Generation 3, minus an original purple-coated Earth pony who was apparently named Sunny Seed, and also an unnamed zebra character who might actually slightly predate the creation of Zakura. This next thing I want to talk about for a while is something pretty special, because they are absolute treasure troves of information about what really the show could have been like in some type of slightly different alternate universe. I'm referring to the My Little Pony show Bibles, one from October of 2008, and a revised, completed version with slightly more stuff added from later in early 2009. For the sake of context, the MLP show/pitch Bible was basically an internal document that was mostly composed by Lauren Faust herself, for the purpose of showing Hasbro what exactly her vision for the show was like, and also to be used as a reference for all the important elements of the show going forward, such as basic info regarding the characters or locations. As you may have guessed, these documents were only ever meant to be seen by people actually working on the show, but they eventually made their way online after being leaked in 2017 and 2018. First and foremost, For a while during the development process, the show was going to be titled My Little Pony Adventures, with a completely different work-in-progress logo as well. Aside from that though, dozens of other changes, both big ones and more subtle ones, can be frequently seen throughout both of the documents. It's genuinely quite jarring and surreal to see so many familiar elements of the show that are just ever so slightly different here in one way or another. There's too much stuff to talk about literally every single detail here, which was later changed. So what I will do is separate everything I find to be especially interesting into 3 categories. Firstly, changes to the characters or locations. It's clear that when the show Bible was created, Lauren Faust had, for the most part, already nailed down the designs and names of most of the characters and whatnot, but there obviously still were a few big outliers. The previously mentioned Twilight Twinkle, Pegasus Pinkie Pie, and Earth Pony Fluttershy were all put on full display in the revision of the show Bible from 2008, with Twilight Twinkle being present in both revisions. Other than the main 6, numerous side characters in the show also had details about them changed. This includes ponies like Big Mac and Apple Bloom, originally being named Big Apple and Appleseed respectively, Celestia initially having the royal title of Queen, which was later changed to Princess because Hasbro believed kids wouldn't find a Queen character to be likable, and Zecora bizarrely only being referred to as Shaman in both versions of the show Bible. Which it's definitely good they changed that, because I can guarantee you the name would have not aged well for numerous reasons. As for things like locations, Ponyville was most notably originally going to be called Philadelphia, and according to old sketches, seemingly also have sort of a more distinct fantasy-inspired, old European village vibe. I can see why the name was changed, as Ponyville definitely matches the cozy small-town vibe of the place a lot more. Aside from that, Sweet Apple Acres was originally called Big Apple Orchard. Both the outside and inside of the city of Canterlot looked quite different at multiple points from what we ended up getting, including this funny-looking vector art of a completely bright golden yellow colored Canterlot. Sugar Cube Corner was also initially named Sugar Cube Sweet Shopee, and additionally went through several different early designs. And Rarity's Carousel Boutique was originally called Carousel Couture, and also seemingly went through at least a few color scheme changes from the outside as well. The second category I want to touch upon are the more overarching and thematic related differences. Through old concept art of Canterlot and in a description for unicorns, it's evident that all unicorns were at one point meant to have the special unique skill of being able to read and sometimes even control the stars in the skies above. They would have apparently been able to gain knowledge from the stars, which would then in turn, by some kind of unexplained vague means, help the Pegasi and Earth ponies by making Equestria's seasons be more efficient. And additionally, they also would have been able to somehow use the stars to long-distance communicate with other ponies as well. I think at least a few elements of this concept did ultimately wind up in the show, such as Twilight being into stargazing and astronomy, or Celestia being named after the word celestial, but it definitely could have been quite interesting if the idea was explored more, because it implies everybody in Canterlot would have been a bunch of constellation-obsessed unicorns, or something. Another thematic change of the show as a whole was how there was a planned stronger emphasis on Queen Celestia, directly telling Twilight Twinkle and the rest of the main six to go and complete a variety of missions. Like, for example, gathering information or confronting dragons who were somehow negatively affecting Equestria. One smaller but still notable thematic change I think is pretty interesting was also the choice of fashion which Lauren Faust had initially designed for the ponies. A type of unique looking hybrid between horse saddles with bridles and dresses. From what I can tell, these were seemingly intended to be the main kind of clothing which ponies would wear in general. But the horse saddle and bridle parts were eventually dropped. If I had to guess, this was probably done because having more conventional, human-looking dresses would simply be more relatable to people watching the show, and also the fact that having ponies wear saddles kinda oddly implies that there are humans around to ride them or something. Anyways, the final category of stuff in the MLP show Bible, which I want to mention, are the changes to the stories of episodes we did get, or alternatively, the stories of episodes which never ended up being made at all. Near the end of the document, there are plot summaries for several planned early episodes of the show. Firstly, the episode Applebuck Season was originally titled Apple Bonk Season, and would have involved Applejack quite literally bonking apple trees with her head instead of her hind legs. I think it's kinda obvious why this was changed, because it could have potentially sent the wrong message to young kids if they saw a cartoon pony repeatedly hitting stuff with their head. Another example of an episode which used to be pretty different was a dog and pony show, which was originally given the title A Dog and Pony Show. It would have apparently focused on Rarity going out gem hunting and getting captured by a posse of gem-obsessed half-prairie dog, half-troll creature, gangster rappers dripping with gold chains and rings. Yes, this was the actual original concept for the Diamond Dogs in the episode. I think this is kinda evidence that not everything Lauren Faust made for MLP was instantly a good idea, because I have a feeling this would have felt bizarrely out of place for the show, and probably wouldn't have aged too well either. As for episodes summarized here which actually never got made, there's one called Bring On the Thunder, which was about the Wonderbolts, who were, by the way, originally called the Blue Thunders, coming to Ponyville while Apple Bloom tries to get help from Rainbow Dash so she can get her cutie mark, and almost getting hurt in the process. There's another one called Fancy Meeting You Deal that would have focused on the main six encountering a mysterious pony living among a horde of talking magical forest deer who also would have had their own cutie marks. And also one more titled Nothing More to See, which would have been about the main six accidentally discovering the lost kingdom of the sea ponies while at the beach, and helping them confront a selfish sea serpent called the Kraken. I think all three of these episodes could have been fairly interesting to see, but the third one about the sea ponies definitely sounds the most fascinating to me. We of course did eventually get sea ponies in the 2017 MLP movie, but it would have been incredibly awesome, or at least intriguing, to see what they could have looked like all the way back in Season 1 when Lauren Faust was still heavily involved. Like, I hate to say it everybody, but I think we might have been robbed of a goated My Little Pony episode. Anyways, I think I've now mentioned all the especially important stuff from the show Bible, other than the fact that Lauren Faust effectively predicted the whole brony phenomenon in like 2008 by saying that boys would sit down and watch the show, which is pretty funny to read in hindsight over 15 years later. Although, with that said, there's still a good amount of other early work-in-progress material that was changed or scrapped which can be found elsewhere. In 2015 and 2013, two books, The Art of Equestria and the first volume of the Elements of Harmony Guidebook series respectively, were released. These were officially licensed books which effectively served to give more of a behind-the-scenes look into the history of MLP Friendship is Magic's production. They both talk about or show a lot of things I've already mentioned in this video, but they still include plenty of cool early designs or ideas, which weren't really featured in the show Bible. Firstly, this is kinda unrelated to the rest of the video, but I want to go on a quick tangent about all of these early sketches from 2008, which were drawn by Martin Ancelobi here and Paul Ruddish. Lauren Faust had recruited them to help her flesh out stuff like the show's environments and color palettes. And I briefly mentioned it earlier, but it's pretty evident that the very earliest incarnation of Ponyville originated from these old sketches of fantasy-inspired European towns which they drew. Additionally, it's also just interesting to see all these early drawings of ponies simply just going about their day, including this one of a few Pegasi jumping on top of a cloud to make it rain, which Lauren Faust herself said in an interview was very influential to her vision of the show, as it gave her the idea that the ponies in Equestria had complete control of how the world around them behaved. Aside from that, it's also worth noting that there's tons of other cool-looking scenic sketches of places from the show, mostly all from another guy called Dave Dunnett. I absolutely love these because they give a good idea of just how much thought and effort was put into designing these areas we see in the show. But anyways, as for any actual scrapped ideas, other than Hall's still being Twilight Twinkle, Lauren Faust was apparently playing around with the idea of giving Twilight stuff like a pentagram cutie mark, a witch's hat, and even a black cat as a pet. Additionally, she also would have been a lot more low-key when moving into Ponyville, by literally trying to conceal the fact she was a unicorn by wearing a robe. And interestingly enough, Spike was also at first intended to have been sent to Twilight after she had already moved to Ponyville. It's implied that he was basically supposed to be just some random baby dragon Celestia had lying around Canterlot for some reason, so she gave him to her as an assistant. Spike and Twilight wouldn't have previously known or lived with each other at all. And speaking of Princess Celestia, as I highlighted a bit ago, she was indeed originally called a queen. But in some of the very first sketches Lauren Faust ever drew of her, she was initially fully conceptualized as Queen Majesty, with a different looking cutie mark as well. This was because she was mostly inspired by the design of the G1 unicorn pony, also called Majesty. Although it seems like this name didn't stick around for long before getting changed to Celestia. In terms of a few other noteworthy character-related differences found in these books, Princess Luna was originally going to be called Princess Selena, and had numerous different earlier designs before we eventually got the one we're all familiar with. And it's evident that Nightmare Moon used to be quite different too, as seen in this very fascinating sketch by Paul Ruddish of Twilight Twinkle confronting what appears to be a much more forbidding and downright ominous-looking version of her. Aside from this, there's a few other cool things, such as Lauren Faust explaining that Zecora was originally intended to have much more of a prominent role in the series, as a type of second mentor figure to Twilight, but the idea never fully came to fruition during the process of writing the episodes for Season 1. Speaking of Zecora, it's also implied in a few early sketches that she could have been given a pet dog at some point, which could have been kinda interesting to see. And quite notably, it's also shown here in a sketch of the Apple family that Lowenfrost had initially given Apple Bloom's early design a cutie mark, an apple jam-filled mason jar. The concept of the cutie mark Crusaders seemingly didn't really exist when this was drawn in 2008, so it's pretty funny to see her just casually depicted as having one here. Anyways, there's also a few smaller, but still interesting things here, like these early sketches of the Wonderbolts, created back when they were still called the Blue Thunders, and also a few other illustrations drawn by Paul Ruddish sometime in 2009 of the main six wearing their elements of harmony. Plus this one of Twilight Twinkle riding on a royal emissary chariot pulled by an early version of a royal guard. And that's pretty much everything especially intriguing I noticed when reading over these two books. However, with that said, we're still not done here, because there is one more final category of cut or changed material which I want to mention. Over the years, through one way or another, numerous assets used in the show's production, such as Adobe Flash files, have been leaked online. Among the contents of the several leaks were numerous things created between 2009 and 2010. This includes more early sketches/illustrations, assets of ponies in the show's art style, and probably most notably, a full-on minute-and-a-half-long test animation from 2009, created back when the show was still going to be called My Little Pony Adventures. Surprisingly enough, there aren't actually too many differences in this animation test on a design level, as this was made after Lowenfrost had already revised and finalized what she wanted most things to look like, but it's nevertheless a very fascinating artifact from the pre-Season 1 era of MLP FIM. It's basically a very early incarnation of the episode Feeling Pinky Keen, with only Twilight, Rainbow Dash, and Pinkie Pie in it, and with all three of them being voiced by Tara Strong, presumably because the other voice actors simply hadn't been casted yet. Another piece of early leaked media from the show, which is sorta related to this test animation, is a demo recording of the theme song for My Little Pony Adventures, which was sung by one of the show's writers, Amy Keating Rogers. The full demo is like a minute-and-a-half long, so I won't play it here, but the lyrics themselves are quite different from the ones heard in the MLP Friendship is Magic theme song. You can pause and take a moment to read them if you'd like. Those two things aside though, like I said earlier, there were also more early drawings, or flash assets included within the leaks. Some of them I've already shown or mentioned earlier in this video, but there's still some cool stuff here, such as more concept art showing off a variety of pony clothing designs, including a few things related to the scrapped saddle dress idea, like this funny-looking illustration of how ponies would have used umbrellas by quite literally attaching them to the back of their saddles. And also, more early work-in-progress versions of several different background ponies, like Lyra and Minuet, in addition to more old sketches of things like characters or locations. The amount of behind-the-scenes material from MLP FIM's production, which has been leaked, is surprisingly big, but I do think what I've mentioned does encapsulate all the cool pre-Season 1 scrapped ideas or changes that have been brought to light because of them. With all that having been said, I think this would be a good time to also quickly mention how there was a bunch of miscellaneous, smaller changed or scrapped ideas, which I simply haven't talked about. For example, the Griffin Gilda originally used to be named Griselda. Spike was planned to more frequently walk on all 4 of his legs instead of being bipedal. According to Lauren Faust, the runtime of each episode of the show was originally going to be 11 minutes instead of 22 minutes. And back when Princess Luna was still called Selena, the decision to change her name was apparently made so late into production that a few pieces of very early MLP G4 merchandise from 2010 actually still refer to her as Selena. The point I'm trying to make is that a lot of changes were made in general during MLP FAM's early days of production from 2008 to 2010, and I can't really list every single small detail which was changed. But with that said, I do believe I have finally finished covering all of the especially notable, or at the very least intriguing, differences I could find info about. I think you should all totally comment down below which old concept or idea I talked about in this video was your personal favorite or something. I myself think they're all very fascinating to learn and research about, so it would be awesome to see what you have to say about them. I said something like this earlier in the video, but I really do think all these early scrapped or changed ideas/designs give a very good glimpse into what the show could have potentially looked like in some kind of alternative universe. Like, seriously, just try to imagine for a moment what the entirety of My Little Pony Friendship is Magic would have been like if the main 6 weren't changed from their original 2008 incarnations. The show very easily could have been drastically different, both design and thematically wise. In so many ways, it's actually kinda crazy. And whether or not the show's quality would have been better or worse than what we did get, we'll never really know for sure. Either way though, I think everything I've talked about also goes to show and highlight the sheer amount of creative effort that Lauren Faust put into conceptualizing and actually making MLP FIM into a reality. Because, after all, it's worth remembering that if it wasn't for her and the rest of the very talented people who brought this iconic show to life, nothing I've featured in this video would have existed at all. So, with all of that now being said, that was the My Little Pony we never got. Thanks for watching. Well, you've now made it to the outro. So, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, then consider doing all the normal stuff. Comment, like, or share it around with your friends. Whichever one of those you prefer. That being said, this will be my final video of 2023, so I want to give a quick thanks to all of you in general for simply continuing to watch these silly pony videos I upload to this channel. I genuinely do appreciate and am grateful for all the amazing support you've all given me within the past year, so yeah, you all have my thanks. Anyways, though, I think that's everything I have left to say now. So like always, I will see you whenever I see you.